This is deep. This is getting really deep right off the bat. Ready? In high school, a picture of myself wearing women's clothes went public.
I could see in Drow society that transitioning to a woman could be seen as social climbing.
This mechanically doesn't make sense. That's why I want to do it. Heck yeah. Cleric at 10th level, they learn divine intervention. That's like the new ability they get. What changed? I want to dress like Laura Dern.
Welcome to Characters Without Stories, a TTRPG podcast about the roads not yet traveled. I'm Star. This episode, I'm joined by Justin Gagliani. Justin is a co-host of the So You Want to Be a Dungeon Master podcast, a TTRPG content creator, and a published writer. Justin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
How long have you been podcasting?
Goodness. I've been podcasting probably for, 3-4 years, but there was a stint of time where I did a different podcast with my sister where we just talked about all kinds of stuff, and that went on for like almost 2 years. Didn't get any traction. Did not do well because there was no niche. It was like one episode's about mythical monsters and the next episode's about our favorite Pokemon, and it just did not do well because people didn't know what to search for. Whatever. Mm-hmm. Then one of my friends, very close friend Taylor from a home game that we play in, was like, hey, do you want to do a D&D podcast? And I was like, I would love to do a D&D podcast. And thus, So You Want to Be a DM was created. God, that's been going on since maybe October of 2023. We started recording episodes and we didn't publish anything until late December, January 2024 to kind of build a little bit of a catalog.
When I started, I didn't know anything, and so I didn't do that. And everybody's like, you got to start with 3 episodes in the can, and so you can release huge. 3 at once and people can binge. And I'm like, I didn't do that.
Yeah.
I was just like, let's throw it out there and see what happens.
Yeah. No, most of the things we're doing, we're kind of learning as we go, as we add more and more to the repertoire of So You Want to Be a DM.
Yeah, definitely. You got to start somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
How long had you been playing D&D before you started podcasting?
I would say probably north of 5 years, give or take. Mm-hmm. Most of that time being a DM, kind of getting stuck in that role of the forever DM. But finding out as I've been a player a couple of times, finding out that I actually do prefer being the dungeon master. Some of that has to do with relinquishing control. It's a whole side story that I need to figure out on my own. Maybe with a therapist. I don't know.
What do you like about being a DM?
Oh, goodness. I think I just love the idea of sharing stories with the table and seeing how they touch on it and how they react to certain things. And I love making people laugh. And I think that's a big part of my personal DMing style, and how I play tabletop games is always funny. I'm interested in one day pursuing a more dramatic and hardcore, your parents fell at the hands of the demon lord. That's super interesting and I want to try it one day. But most of the time it's just jokes. It's just silly laughs that I like that have people have fun. And I think that's kind of where it comes from, is just being the ringleader of a bunch of silly goofs is kind of why I love it so much.
Mm-hmm. Like many of my guests, being a forever DM, you're bringing a character you haven't had a chance to play.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Justin, who are you bringing to the table?
So I made a character that was supposed to be for a short campaign that one of my players wanted to run. And for a slew of reasons, that never happened. And so I have this character kind of locked and loaded, ready to go at a moment's notice. Her name is Jessica Jeroux, because I love alliterations. I could talk so much just about the name. I love alliterations so much. So Jessica Jeroux, JJ. The Jeroux has a silent X at the end because I'm obsessed with needlessly pompous names, like kind of like this pretentiousness that's just unnecessary. So having like silent letters, my actual last name has a silent letter in it, so that works out. Jessica Jeroux is a Drow wizard of the Chronergy magic arcane tradition. So essentially time magic. I love wizards. I love having as many spells as possible. And then also like I wanted to really explore an interesting dynamic with this character in relation to my own experience with gender. So like I, as a dungeon master and as a human being, have used a lot of what I refer to as like classic D&D lore. So like Forgotten Realms, Faerun, all that stuff. But I've from the very get-go have changed a ton of it because it's steeped in so much problematic behavior, whether it's like how it views fantasy races or like the idea that certain things can be born inherently evil and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wanted to explore a very specific part of it that I kind of picked up from reading the very first, and I probably personally, no offense to anybody who likes the series, it wasn't for me. But R.A. Salvatore's like Drizzt Do'Urden or whatever his name is.
Another pretentious name.
Yeah. Another pretentious name, yes.
Multiple Z's and an apostrophe, you know, it's
You
D&D.
need some apostrophes. Reading about the Drow society that he grew up in and how it was incredibly matriarchal, but also super separated by gender, at least in that first book. I've been told that things change and that there are exceptions to the rule, and that's fantastic. But just using that as like this core concept and asking the question of like what it would be like to be trans in that society, to have been, you know, assigned male at birth and then, you know, have that inner feeling, that gender dysphoria of feeling like you are truly a woman and what that would mean in that society and stuff like that. And also giving myself an interesting challenge in terms of like, what if my family is not cool with it?
Yeah.
The reason I feel, just to get ahead of some things that I would ask people if I heard people saying these things, I personally identify as non-binary. I use they, them pronouns. I've explored my own gender a ton in my life, both in the closet and out of the closet. And I've used in the past, specifically Dungeons and Dragons, but tabletop games in general, to explore so many aspects of my own identity, whether it was being queer. Like I played a bisexual character before I ever felt comfortable enough coming out as bisexual. I've played a non-binary or femme-presenting characters far before I ever felt comfortable identifying publicly as non-binary or using they, them pronouns. I even played characters who were sober and didn't drink alcohol before I finally made the plunge to be like, I'm not going to drink alcohol anymore. And it's been over a year. So I wanted to explore that more fully in a safe place that felt fun and interesting. I also get cool magic spells and stuff. Yeah, that's kind of the impetus of the creation of Jessica Jeroux.
And this is a trans woman, correct?
Yeah.
Why a trans woman?
I wanted to explore both the character and my own relationship with what it means to be a woman. For people listening, I'm using air quotes when I say that, but I think that's kind of what it was all about. A sort of nudging of myself as the player and creator of the character to feel more comfortable exploring femininity and different aspects of it and stuff like that. I went through such an interesting journey when it comes to my own gender presentation and identity and stuff like that. In high school, this is deep. This is getting really deep right off the bat. Ready? In high school, a picture of myself wearing women's clothes went public. Yeah, bad. Not good for 17, 18-year-old Justin, who's so in the closet at this point about every aspect of that, right? And it rocked my world. And it was like just having so many of my friends immediately turn their backs on me, having a select few stand by my side and all of these different things, and just being like, as soon as I go away to college, I'll never do this again. This is a phase. This is a weird temptation and I'll get over it and it'll be fine. Blah, blah, blah. Not the case, right? Because there are certain parts of your identity and yourself that you can't just turn away forever. And so slowly getting more accepting of myself, let alone other people's acceptance of me, that wasn't even a concern. Like, I am very fortunate and blessed to have parents and family who are incredibly accepting. Them like kicking me out in those kind of worst case scenarios was never a thought. It was always more about me accepting myself and feeling comfortable enough to do things and like pushing aside my own like inner demons to like experiment in things in a public way. The first time I did nail polish, it was the darkest colors possible. Like, it can never be a shade of pink. It can never be a bright color. It had to be like black at first. That way, God forbid, I'm in a gas station and some guy is like, "Why are you painting your nails?" I could be like, "It's metal, dude." Like, so I don't know, that I would have some sort of excuse as if I need one. And then like anything, any form of gender expression has always been a huge challenge for me to find the courage to do that. And I was hoping that this character would kind of nudge me along to accept the more inner desires to present more feminine in different aspects. I think that's kind of where it came from.
Yeah. At the point that you built this character or designed this character, where were you in your gender journey?
Geez, this was probably like a year ago. So like a lot further than in the past or something like that. Like, this character isn't that old of a creation, but still to this day, I mean, there are times where depending on where I'm going, I just recently, maybe like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, came back from a high school, like a friend that I grew up with in elementary school through high school. We were super close, always considered each other best friends and stuff like that. He comes from a very religious Christian household. And when I went to his wedding, I didn't paint my nails because I thought it would make me feel more comfortable. And it's such a sad thing that I was willing to eat that part of myself to make other people feel more comfortable. Because that's in reality what it is making other people feel more comfortable. And I ended up just feeling like I was lacking a part of myself in this very simple way of expressing my own gender. Because, I mean, painting your nails doesn't have to be anything. It doesn't mean that you're non-binary or anything like that, right? Like, how you personally perceive gender expression is up to the individual. But like, for me, doing that was like a big eye opener of being like, whoa, maybe this friendship isn't all it's cracked up to be if I feel like I have to do this.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, it was just, even to this day, I'm still always in this constant battle with myself and my own like sort of anxiety, always thinking about worst case scenarios, which is how my anxiety manifests. The example of a guy at a gas station wanting to like fight me because I have a rainbow pride flag or some shit. It's been a lot of that, and like slowly feeling more and more comfortable being myself. And it's been honestly I've been so lucky in this little niche of the TTRPG community that we're in, like a lot of us little creators and stuff like that, like all from so many people that I met through that January pledge drive for Palestine. I've just met so many beautiful individuals who already passed that super low bar of being against genocide. And then from there, being like, wow, there's so many other people, and I get to introduce myself as Justin, non-binary, they, them. And it's so much easier when that's like the first interaction, as opposed to being like, I know you've known me for 30 years as this, but now I'm this, or I've always been this, but now I'm publicly this, or whatever. But like, that was the call for Jessica Jeroux, pushing myself in a very safe and not very dangerous way of just being like, let's explore this. I've played female characters in the past and femme-presenting characters and stuff like that, but never specifically a trans one. And so I wanted to explore that space a little bit as a non-binary person and somebody who wants to deeply on the inside present slightly more femininely, but has never had the courage to do so. The idea of me wearing a skirt in public, there's a part of me that's like, oh, that sounds incredible. And then there's another part of me that's like, that is so scary. I cannot even imagine. Hopefully Jessica Jeroux will push me over the hump a little bit and we can figure some things out.
So I think it is a fascinating choice to play a trans woman in Drow society. I just want to give a brief shout out to a podcast called The Slovenly Trolls. They did a mini series essentially on the problematic nature of Drow society. It's a great listen. You should all go, and don't drop everything right now, but go later and listen to that podcast. Give me a very quick breakdown or primer on why there's such a gender divide in Drow society.
Oof. So my understanding of it is that some of it stems down, as is true with a lot of Forgotten Realms stuff, like the reason that for some reason in that lore, orcs are inherently evil. Like if you're born an orc, you're evil. And that's just kind of the way it is, unless you're that 1 in a million Driz Do'Urden who stands alone. It has a lot to do with the gods and like the pantheons that the Forgotten Realms uses. I believe that a lot of the Drow society customs come from Lolth, this like spider queen, this evil, somewhat chaotic in like the more, not in like a D&D alignment way, but chaotic in like real world ways. That's my understanding of it, at least. As soon as I kind of like got the bag of, okay, this is kind of what it was like, I don't do a ton of research past that, because I'm always like, same thing with like orcs being evil or Drow, specifically the dark-skinned elves being evil and all these different things. And like the slavery is huge in Forgotten Realms, and always just being like, no, I'm not going to use that. Actually, I'm going to change that because I don't like it. That's my understanding of it. It's very superficial. I just know that in the society, women are normally in positions of power. They're normally like the high priestesses. They have a lot of magic and stuff like that. And a lot of the men happen to be more like soldiers. It's almost like bees in a way, except bees usually have like the one queen. But it's kind of like that where, you know, there's like the drones, the soldiers, they go out and they do the fighting and stuff like that. They can be on the front lines, whereas the women are the ones who are kind of controlling society and in these positions of power within each household, and also these like priestesses of Lolth. And I think maybe some of it has to do with the fact that Lolth is always identified or presented as a female deity. Maybe that has something to do with it. But past that, if there's a deeper thing, I would go to Slovenly Trolls, because it's not coming from me.
Yeah. Well, and this is all coming from writers. It's not like there's some sort of inherent way that Drow are that cannot be changed. Obviously, things are changing, and
yeah,
you know, and there were terrible sexist reasons that they did it.
Yeah.
This was, you know, a choice that people made. And it's interesting that whenever they build a matriarchy, it's evil. It's automatically evil. There's not a society ruled by women that's not like problematic.
That's so true.
I mean, maybe the Rashaman, I don't know that much about them. But yeah, so I think it's interesting, both of us knowing that it's a problematic trope, not something we should really play into, but you're building a character that very specifically relates to that trope, meaning that in the game, you would need to have this society built in this very stratified way in order for the character to be related to that. I mean, I think that's one of the most interesting parts about the character, as far as I know them so far.
Yeah, true.
How do you feel about like coming to the table where that's something that exists in the world?
That's a great question. I think that the way we were planning, because I had discussions with the game master of that particular campaign that never was. I think the way that we were going to handle it is very like, this society exists and it's over there, and I have left that society. And so there wasn't going to be a ton of mentions to it, or there wasn't going to be a lot of my character having a side quest where I go back home and we check it out and say, hey, mom and dad, I'm home. Now I'm Jessica, or something like that.
Yeah.
I think it was a little loose and fast with how we were kind of playing with it, in a very like, you know, kind of in like a superficial way. Like, it's part of my backstory. This is how I grew up. And then I entered the, let's call it like the modern world, where other societies have been way more welcoming. And it was also, I think the game master was using, Call of the Netherdeep, like one of the Critical Role settings. Yeah. And there are parts of that setting, because Matt Mercer is much more accepting than the old school writers of Forgotten Realms, where there are trans and non-binary characters and stuff like that. So it was just like, here's a mention of the old world where gender was huge and like societal norms and all this stuff. And that's in the past, and this is the future. So I think that's kind of how we were handling it.
I could see in Drow society that transitioning to a woman could be seen as social climbing.
Yeah, certainly.
Do you think that that was the reaction that Drow society had to Jessica? Did Jessica transition while she was in Menzoberranzan or in Drow society, or was it just a thing that she wanted to do?
I think the way that I wrote it in the backstory was that she had begun experimenting, like the small ways that you can experiment with gender expression and gender identity that aren't big deal things, like taking hormones or surgery or something, like kind of very small things, like, for example, the way you dress or something like that, like certain mannerisms that you can try on, or even like name changes or pronouns or like small little things. And then because she's a wizard, I was going to introduce some like very basic low level spells, maybe even like disguise self as like a way to sort of experiment with expression. And then being like caught, having that nightmare experience of, oh my gosh, I'm not ready for the world to see what I feel like on the inside. And now they have. And it was abrupt. And it was because it mirrors my experience that I talked about earlier. I came out as bisexual first and then non-binary, like as I fully came to understand sexuality and gender, at least for me. I didn't come out as bisexual until I was 30 and then non-binary at like 32. I'm 33 now. So like not that long ago, you know, like pretty late in the game for some people. That nightmare experience in high school potentially pushed me off of fully accepting myself for years, for like over a decade, if not more. So I think that was part of it. And then just having her kind of experiment a little bit at home, get caught, and then just come to a head of being like, these people are not going to understand me. Like they're too blinded by their own sort of cognitive dissonance of like, this is how gender is supposed to work. And I can see that they're wrong and that I don't fit within these binaries. And so I'm going to leave. Keeping in mind that like elves age differently in D&D and stuff like that. And I kind of like put it on to human year perspective just for this ease. She leaves around like 15, 16 and she's on her own.
Very young.
Yeah.
Yeah, navigating through the Underdark at 15 or 16?
Pretty much. I mean, yeah, she goes through the Underdark, but then pretty quickly goes above ground because like that was always a big thing that I found in Drow society with R.A. Salvatore specifically, like the Drizzt books is like there's such a big othering of the upper world versus the Underdark. Like a lot of like, those topsiders, you can't trust them. So like, of course, being like, well, I can't even trust my own family. So let's see what's up there. And so having her kind of explore that pretty quickly and like having there be this huge disconnect. I'm just thinking of this now. It's interesting that she's a time wizard specifically because there's such an interesting disconnect between the past and the future for Jessica. I, as the creator of Jessica, didn't give her a dead name. There is no male associated name of when that Jessica was given at birth. I didn't even come up with one intentionally. There is none. It will never come up. I didn't want to explore having the character dead name her. Like, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
There is no dead name. It's just Jessica Jeroux. And that name specifically, the name Jessica, now it's the name of my cat, which is hilarious. But like...
Is your cat like dark gray?
She is gray and white, actually. So my name is Justin, but my entire family from the time I was pretty much born call me Jesse with a Y at the end specifically. So my whole family calls me Jesse. Growing up in kindergarten, all through high school, everybody called me Jesse. That was my name for all intents and purposes. It wasn't until college when I thought I was going to make this big change. I wasn't going to do that gay stuff, which is so stupid. Looking back on it, I changed to Justin and I've been rocking Justin ever since. And I do love the name Justin. No shade to it whatsoever. Obviously, I would change it if I didn't like it. But I remember so distinctly being bullied so much of my life because people would call me Jessica because Jesse, it's just one jump for a bully to make.
Right.
Oh, your name's Jesse? Jessica. That's a girl name. I had big buck teeth. They would call me Girl Squirrel. What the hell is that? What a mean thing. And so this idea of the name Jessica and Jesse and stuff like that has such a deep place like in my own psyche and like memory and like trauma and stuff like that, that it was the easiest first name to come with when it came to what name would this trans character be that I'm sort of vicariously living through in a way, which I don't often do. I don't often put myself into characters, or if I do, it's like small stuff like this character doesn't like pineapple on pizza. Tiny, silly goose. This is like one of the few times that I'm like truly putting in deep aspects of myself into a character, which is why it's such a shame that I didn't get to play them. Hopefully we will play her later.
How did Jessica start becoming a wizard?
What a good question. I think that part of it, so it's a little bit twofold. I like the idea of in Dungeons and Dragons, 5th edition specifically, that's the edition that I'm the most comfortable with. And also when I started playing, So I don't know a ton about older editions, but my understanding is that wizards get their magic from study, right? They read books and that's how they get it. That's why they're intelligence casters, blah, blah, blah. But I also like the idea of wizards having, almost in a sorcerer-like way, having like an innate ability to touch magic. And I think like Forgotten Realms refers to it as like the weave. I don't know. But the idea that there has to be something like in there in order for you to start studying and then maximize your output. And so I think that was part of it, is like having how rare it is to have a drow who does magic and is also not biologically, I suppose, a female. And then tapping into that, I picked time magic first and foremost because I think it's cool. I think
it is very cool.
The idea of time magic is just cool. So I wanted to explore that. And it's also like very unique to the setting that the Exandria, like the Critical Role setting, like that's where Matt Mercer introduced chronergy magic as like a mechanic in the game. So that had a big part of it. Yeah, it was really to just change her circumstances. It was to do things that in modern society, we have millions of different things to provide for gender affirming care. And I imagine that in most fantasy medieval-ish time period societies, they don't have a ton of things like that. They don't have hormones or blockers or different things of that nature. And that's where magic steps in, is what I was kind of going for, I think.
How does that relate to time for you?
Well, I think the time thing is so interesting for several reasons. I think there's some like deep reasons that I wanted to explore time magic. There's the superficial reasons, which I already went over. It's cool and it is in the setting. But then it's a lot of like, I came out so late. What if I had come out earlier? How different my life would look if I could go back in time and change things, and regrets, and exploring all of those facets of time. As well as like, I found like a very interesting through line that I personally experience. And then I found it also to be true with a lot of trans femme individuals or non-binary individuals, where like you come out a little bit later in life, late 20s, 30s, something like that. And the first thing you kind of want to do, and this is going to sound interesting, the first thing you kind of want to do is dress like really slutty, because you didn't get to explore femininity in your teens. And so now's the chance to wear a tube top and fishnets and like 7-inch pumps, because you're like, God dang it, this is it. And then quickly you're like, I'm 32. Like, I can't do this. Like, this isn't for me. But like, I found that interesting thing of like lost time. Mm-hmm. The idea of like, I'll never know what it's like to go through certain things as a femme presenting person in high school, for example. Like, I'll just never experience that. So I think that's where time comes into play as a really interesting thing. But that isn't all true for Jessica. Like, Jessica also has her own like in character, in world practical reasons for being into time. And part of that has to do with like in the world of Exandria, there's a lot of really interesting ancient events and ancient history and stuff like that. For example, there's one civilization called Aor. They're ancient, but they were also highly advanced when it came to like the sciences and stuff like that. But then they fell. So the idea of being a sort of archaeologist with access to time magic and how interesting that profession would be when you can actually like get high enough level where you could maybe even potentially go back in time and see things firsthand, have that Jurassic Park moment of like turning the head and seeing the dinosaur. I just think that's so cool. And then like putting a real world spin on that exact thing is like a lot of the gender binaries and societal norms when it comes to men and women and stuff has so much to do, if you look historically, with like colonialism and imperialism and stuff like that. Like, if you look at a lot of like ancient societies, they were, compared to what some of our societies are doing today, they were way ahead of us when it came to gender ideology. You know, like you look at Native Americans when it comes to Two-Spirit, you look at Aotearoa or New Zealand, like what their different societies were doing, Aboriginal communities in Australia. Like, there's so many examples of people exploring gender in so many vast and interesting, diverse ways. And then white explorers came along and were like, actually, men wear pants. and it's just like, God dang.
The person has a sword. They must be a man, right?
Exactly.
The two women in a grave together. They must be roommates, right?
They must be roommates. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Stuff like that I think is also kind of interesting to look at. Yeah, I think that's kind of where it all came from, is just time and history. And, you know, if you're talking like mechanics of D&D from a character sheet standpoint, like so many of the skills that 5th edition has, you know, acrobatics, athletics, stealth, all that stuff, so many of them are intelligence based. And I love, as a DM, I love having players who don't dump stat their intelligence, because I find that intelligence checks are such a good way to lord dump for me to just explode with exposition and all this information that I have been hoarding in my head for so long. And so part of it is just like repaying the favor of being like, hey, I'm really good at history checks. I'm really good at arcana and this and that or whatever. Mm-hmm. And being a wizard, obviously intelligence would be my best score. I think I rolled really high for strength, and I found like a piece of artwork that had a drow woman tightening like wraps around her fist. Probably is meant to be like a fighter or a monk. And I was like, oh, what if my spell book, all of my spells are written on my wrist wraps as just like a cool way to flavor spell books and stuff like that. And that was it. I was like, I'm going to have a wizard who has like a 14 in strength, which is unheard of.
Right.
Usually everyone dumps strength when it comes to wizards, which makes sense.
Is she going to be a mummy by the time she hits level 20?
That's a good point. Probably. Yeah. Wow. I didn't think about how it would actually look to add spells to everything.
It's like those letters where people just start writing in tiny, tiny, tiny font.
Yes.
Until you can barely read it.
Yeah. It's like when you're in elementary school and you're writing a happy birthday card and it's like a giant H. And then you're like, oh no. Yeah. And then you do birthday and you forget.
Where am I going to go from here?
It's a giant B. And you're like, I did it again. I did it again. It's exactly like that. Yeah. What an interesting question. I honestly had not considered that at all. God, probably. Oh gosh, what would I do? Yeah, maybe the wraps just keep going up her arm, or maybe they just get thicker. And so then it's just like these like gauntlets made of cloth around her fists. I don't know. Interesting.
Awesome. You mentioned rolling for stats. Is that something that you usually do?
Yeah, most often.
Why is it that you like rolling?
I like rolling because it, to me, in my experience, allows wilder decisions when it comes to character creation for those players who care more about mechanics. So like the min-maxers, the optimizers, the power gamers and stuff like that. It just allows more options. So like, for example, there are certain multi-class options out there that are not as quote unquote optimal because they use so many different stats to make their builds effective or whatever. And if you're doing standard array or point buy or something like that, chances are you're not going to have 3 stats that are incredible. You're going to have one that's really good and then a second one that's pretty good. But with rolling, there's the potential to have like, you know, by level 5, you have 3 stats that are 18 plus. I like that. I'm down for it. When I choose to run a game that cares more about mechanics and the rules, and is more like I have a table of people who are about that, then I do like having powerful characters. I'm going to give so many magic items away. It's unreal. Like other people would be like, they're only level 3. Like you cannot give this very rare magic item, and I'm giving it to them. Because then it allows me as the DM to go a little harder when it comes to the combat. Because it's like, well, they're stronger. They can handle a vampire at this level because they rolled for stats. They have insane skills. I'm giving them all these extra little bonuses because I find it to be really fun. Mm-hmm. But every once in a while for like a one shot, like if it's kind of just like time, I might be like, we'll do like standard array. But even then I sometimes modify it. So instead of it being the traditional like 15, 14, 13, whatever, it'll be like 17, 16. Like it'll just be a little higher. And it's for the same reason. It's just like, you guys are heroes. I want you to have dope characters. And when I do the rolling thing, so I do the classic roll 4d6, drop the lowest, but then I also do reroll ones. So anytime a 1 comes up, you can reroll it before dropping the lowest and everything. And then when you roll all 6 of your stats, you set them up. You're like, okay, my strength is this, my dex is this. If you're looking at those and you're like, God, this kind of sucks, do it again. I don't care. And you don't even have to tell me that you're doing it again. Just do it again. And if at the second time it still sucks and you're like, I don't think I'm going to have fun with this character, do it again. Who cares? You know what I mean? Like, I'd rather, as long as you're not coming to the table with all 20s and everyone else doesn't have all 20s, as long as we're all kind of super powerful, then I'm down for it.
So you came to creating this character with, I'm going to be a wizard. And when you roll for stats, are you rolling like the first roll is strength, the second roll, like it has to go in that order, or do you pick and choose?
Pick and choose.
So then you made a choice to put that stat in strength.
Yes.
And why did you decide to do that?
I think it was because I am the type of player who likes to go against type often and likes to kind of go against the grain. And so if you're talking purely mechanics and you're just going by like that way of playing D&D, it doesn't make sense for me to put a decent number in strength. It makes mechanical sense for me to dump stat strength. I don't need strength. I mean, a 10 would be incredible. And just having a 0 on that. There's only one skill check to strength. It's saving throws. Yeah, they're going to come up sometimes, but I have other means of dealing with those. There's going to be other characters in the group who will be the barbarian, the paladin, the strength-based characters. There's no reason for me to be strength. And then I saw this one piece of artwork with the wraps, and I was like, God, that's cool. And that was it. It was as simple as that. It was like, this mechanically doesn't make sense. That's why I want to do it. Heck yeah.
So what is Roll for Luck? Roll for Luck is a table of Black storytellers, Black joy, and lots of Black chaos. As once said by one of our Roll for Luck players, Ava, who is a veteran at the table, Roll for Luck is a kitchen sink of chaos. Throw in some drama, toss in some laughs, and sprinkle in as many potential romantic plot lines as you can, and it'll make you consider the power of fate and luck, and how these two forces of nature dance together, with both players and DM being able to play off each other in the cases of comedy and tragedy. So what are you waiting for? Check us out on every other Wednesday on Girls 20s World's Twitch channel at 8 p.m. Eastern. See you there.
You mentioned multiclassing and kind of how stats relate to multiclassing. Coming with this character and starting with this strength stat, is that something, this is just one example. I mean, obviously you decide differently for different characters, but do you ever let that guide how the character progresses? So for example, you're like, oh, I've got a wizard with pretty good strength. Like I'm going to take a level in fighter. I mean, that would be a weird multiclass, but could be interesting.
Absolutely. I think the way that I handle multiclassing, it depends on the campaign itself and like where we're starting. You know, I recently joined a game where we started at level 10. So that was like very easy for me to multiclass because I don't have to go through the slog of like, God, I would love to be level 6 wizard, but now I have to be level 5 wizard, level 1 fighter, where it's like not getting a ton. Because if you're starting at level 10, you can already build that multiclass that's pretty effective right from the jump. When it comes to building the character from the ground up through the game and through all the sessions and the campaign and stuff like that, I kind of just let the story go where it's going to go. I've done that in the past where like same thing where it's like mechanically it doesn't make the most sense for me to multiclass in this way. If I'm a wizard, artificer uses intelligence. I have a decent strength. Like maybe I go monk or something. It'll make my AC a ton higher. Who knows? Like there's so many options. But who knows? Maybe there's something that happens down the line where I need to make a deal with a patron and now I'm multiclassing warlock. Or like maybe for some reason my character gets real religious and I go cleric or something. I don't know. A lot of times, I'll just let the story dictate how things ought to go and then input the slightest bit when it comes to mechanics. Like a little bit, because I want my character to be good at what they're supposed to be good at. So I'm not going to like totally hamstring myself. But for the most part, I'm story first, mechanics second.
How do you feel about characters that are really just built about mechanics? So I'll give you an example. There was a character in a game that I was playing in, and they started as a paladin, took a level in bard, took a level in warlock, took a level in sorcerer. And I'm just kind of like, when did you become a sorcerer? When did you go to bard college? Who's your patron?
Yeah.
So to me, I'm very much like, if you're multiclassing, give me a narrative reason why this happens. I have a character in my game right now who's a sorcerer who multiclassed into artificer, and it's got to be like one of the worst multiclasses. But it's fantastic because she did it because she met her father who is an artificer and she wanted to be like him. And I think it's beautiful.
Yeah.
So what is your take on narrative multiclassing and mechanical multiclassing?
Yeah. It's very rare that I'm going to tell a player you can't multiclass that way because story-wise it doesn't make sense. But I am going to try and push them towards like finding a narrative reason for this. You know, like I'm willing to say yes to almost anything if you can give me some sort of dramatic reasoning behind it. I need like an RP reason for like how you're doing this. I even asked that of my players who I've been playing with for years at our home, the table where I met Taylor at, that we're still playing for 4 years. Even when they level up, they're not even multiclassing. It could just be like, you're cleric level 9 and now you're cleric level 10. Well, cleric at 10th level, they learn divine intervention. That's like the new ability they get. What changed? Yeah. We all know that mechanically it's just you got XP or we hit a milestone or whatever it was. But like, let's figure out something juicy for like why now you can call on the gods before you couldn't. Now you can. And even then it's only a percentile dice to figure it out. What is that like? And I like doing stuff like that, having the level ups be a little bit more meaningful. And I find the same to be true for multiclassing. Taylor and I do a bonus content thing on our Patreon. We call it multi-class mystery mashup, where we draw classes using like a random wheel generator. And it's totally random. And we have to use standard array, no magic items. And right now we're doing level 10. You got to just come up with it on the fly and also come up with like who this character is. Why are they paladin and druid? What does that person look like? I have so much fun with it. Taylor keeps rolling like classes that already make sense together, and it's annoying the hell out of me because I'm like, oh, great. Cleric druid, both wisdom. Like, what the hell? I'm over here with like bard druid I had to come up with, which was fascinating though, because I created a character who was a fisherman, and that's kind of where the druid comes in. And then the bard comes in. I gave them the chef feat, and they were like a hibachi chef. So it's like a performance. And that's where the bard came in. So this idea of like, I'm connected with nature. I have the fishing background and all this stuff, but then also I'm this like performative chef. And that's kind of how it all tied together. And it worked out great.
I love that. I love that you're talking about narrative leveling. That's something that I personally am a huge fan of, that I don't see enough of in the games that I play, is like, how did you gain these new skills? For example, I was playing a sorcerer, and I think it's really interesting, the question of like, how do sorcerers level up? Because it's not like they picked a book and like read a new spell, you know? So like the way I played it was that she would see a monster cast a spell, or she would see somebody cast a spell and be like, I'm going to figure out how to do that. And just in camp times, like be practicing that thing that she learned.
Yeah.
You're playing a wizard. How do you think that Jessica gains new spells? Is she like happening upon a book? Is she meeting another wizard who gives her a spell? Is she going to a magic shop?
Yeah, I think it's a collection of things. I think it would depend on what I'm gaining specifically. So like when I created the character, I think we were starting at like level 3 or something fairly low. And a lot of the spells that I had come up with, I obviously picked some chronergy spells because of just I'm a chronergy wizard. So I'm going to pick some time spells. But then I think sometimes this is like hamstringing myself. I like to pick spells that other people don't pick. So like everyone picks Fireball. So I'm intentionally not going to pick Fireball, even though it's a great spell. Like it is a good spell. I'm not going to pick it. So like instead I have to pick all these really obscure spells and find really interesting creative ways to use them and stuff. And so I was picking a lot of like earth-based spells because I was an archaeologist. So the idea of like mold earth as I want to say it's a cantrip, and different things of like that, Maximilian's earthen grasp or something like that.
I love that spell.
And just using different earth spells and kind of focusing in on that element of like digging, essentially, like digging for the past and for clues. So it would depend on what spells I was going to learn in the level up. If specifically, like, I can give an example vicariously through one of my players. Taylor's character worships the Storm Lord, so it's all about lightning and thunder, and he's a Tempest cleric mixed with a Storm sorcerer, so he's got two storm things going on, essentially. So he casts a lot of lightning-based spells. The wizard in the group, when they leveled up and they could finally cast 6th level spells, they chose the chain lightning spell. And the way that they explained their level up was that it was by watching their friend do all this lightning stuff and being like, that's incredible. I want to do some lightning stuff.
Yeah.
It would depend on the specific spells that I was going to be learning is how I would pick them up. Of course, some of them would just be like trying to find as many scrolls as possible so that I could just learn a ton of spells. Yeah, it would depend on like really specifically, like if I can get to the level where you learn 5th level, Big B's Hand is a spell that I've seen other people use and I've never had it as a player. And so that would be something that would be really interesting. Maybe I have like a vision where I speak to, I love spells that are named after casters. I find it to be really interesting. So like maybe I have a conversation with Big B in like a dream sequence or something like that. And he like one-on-one teaches me the spell or something. Although with Forgotten Realms and stuff, you never know because half of those old school wizards, if you go straight by the lore, they might be really problematic. So I have to look up Big B and see if he's an okay guy.
Yeah,
knows?
I know nothing about Big B. It's like I know about Tasha, know about Elminster, but nothing about Big B. You talked about getting scrolls. One of the ways that wizards learn spells is by transcribing a scroll into their spell book. But there's a gold cost associated with it. And I think it's really interesting. Wizards are like inherently gold seeking because they need it to get more spells. And I don't know a person that ever plays a wizard that doesn't do it because they want all of the spells that they can possibly get.
Yeah.
So how much is Jessica motivated by money? And what is she motivated for? What is she interested in doing in the world? Why is she out there?
I think that she is only motivated by money as far as it is a practical means to an end. She needs the money because, just like you said, it costs money to do these things. Back to Jurassic Park for some reason. It's my only archaeology reference, or paleontology in that case. The reason they say yes to go to Jurassic Park is because he offers them funding, right?
Yeah.
But it's not because they're like, we need the money, like we love rich things. It's strictly like a means to an end. And I think that is kind of where Jessica is coming from, is like, absolutely, she's trying to make as much money as possible, but only because that is how you get things. Like, that's how you get more spells. That's how, if I wanted to get travel to an old historical site, I would have to like book an airship or something, like, and that costs money. And I would need a team of helpers and that would cost money and all this different stuff. And so just like operating within the realm of capitalism where things cost money and I got to make money to do it. And then to the second part of your question, I think it comes down to exploring these past civilizations is really like a deep curiosity to understand what was lost. In my head, at least, I don't know if this is just like my own headcanon or something. I liken a lot of these ancient civilizations, specifically in Exandria that Matt Mercer has written, including Aor and stuff like that, to the Library of Alexandria. This idea of like, there's so much knowledge there and it was burned up. What if we could discover some stuff, or even like at a higher magic level, like go back in time and like figure things out? I think that's kind of her biggest desire at this moment. I was like kind of leaving it a little open for things to connect with the actual setting and characters and plot line that the DM, because this was like the DM, it would have been her first time running a longer campaign. So like, I intentionally wasn't including a ton of like proper nouns in my backstory. You know, I was leaving it pretty open and loosey-goosey to be able to, for us to collaborate together. It's just a deep curiosity of these ancient civilizations and trying to figure out what magics they possessed and their connection to time magic potentially, or that setting also has gravity magic. And so that is another interesting concept, the relationship between time and gravity. Very Stephen Hawking's. Like really trying to get into a brief history of time.
You talked a lot about liking lore and wanting to have a character who could get all the lore because they're intelligent. And you're also talking about your relationship to the lore, specifically of Exandria, of all these fallen civilizations. Did you start with, oh my God, this world has so much cool lore, Or do you start with, I want a character that can figure out lore?
Great question. I think it maybe comes from having a DM experience, having a character who is inherently intelligent as like mechanically speaking is helpful to newer DMs just because it gives them the opportunity of like, hey, Justin, make a history check. I was like, oh, okay. Actually, you guys know that this is what I meant to say or something like that. I always love having that, like in the game, having certain characters who are really good at certain skills. I find that intelligence and wisdom are the two that come up more often, but like having those players that you can fall back on to kind of like help me help you kind of thing in a situation. I always love to be a player at tables with new DMs and to be, if they're looking for it, it's always a discussion that we would have beforehand. If they're looking for advice, rules, whatever it may be at the table, like I'm there for that. And it can be in character or above board. Hey, Justin, can Mage Hand do that? Or something like that. I was fascinated by the idea of an ancient civilization that was also incredibly technologically advanced. The dichotomy of being incredibly futuristic and also ancient. And I just think that's a cool idea in general. So naturally, I was like, how do I explore that? I'll make a character who cares about that. And then all these little tiny bullet points connecting to the nucleus of this character being like this deep personal trans character with a tragic backstory and stuff like that. And then on the outer cotton candy surface being like, it sounds cool. We should check it out.
It's got great flavor.
Yeah, it goes back to like my desire of like just making people laugh, having fun. I know when I'm a DM, I love to include silly little things like that, like just dumb examples, fun little lore drops and stuff. And I know what it feels like sometimes when you put time and planning into something and they're like, we don't need to visit that. Let's leave the city. And you're like, oh no.
Yeah.
The museum. You were going to learn so much at the museum.
My players did that to me once. It's like I built like an entire city and then they got there and I stupidly gave them a quest that took them out of the city, like something urgent and in two separate places too. So they had to split the party completely. And it was like they came into town, they bought hot dogs and they immediately left. And I had built this whole racetrack thing. It was sad, but I got to bring it in later. So
yeah,
they're going to come back here because God damn it.
That's what, I've learned along the way is like the concept of like recycling things.
Yeah.
Or like reusing things or even upcycling things. Cause sometimes they come up so much later that you can be like, I'm going to add so many different elements to this racetrack now that weren't there previously. And I find that to be so fun. But in the time, it feels like a mistake. It really is just like a learning experience. It's not a big deal. But like anytime you have a time urgency when it comes to a quest is like, dang it, why did I make it? They have to do it tomorrow. Like, why did I do that? That takes away all this stuff. I've done that all the time where they're like, we don't have time to go to the shop. We have to get this mission done. And you're like, damn it. I could have just, damn it.
Yeah. I think it's really sweet the way you talked about building a character that specifically plays to helping the DM or playing to the strengths of DM or what the DM wants to get out of the campaign. Is that something that you usually do? I know you don't get to play characters a lot.
Yeah. It depends on what the DM is kind of going for or who the DM is, like how experienced they are. Or also with D&D 5th edition, I'm incredibly to the point where we have a podcast. I'm pretty experienced when it comes to that system. So like, I feel confident that I can kind of just make a character to help other people out and stuff like that. I've been in one shots as a player where I'm like, there's something weird going on. Maybe I'll cast Dispel Magic. And the DM will privately message me and be like, please don't. And it's like, hey, enough said. No questions asked. I won't do that. That's easy for me not to do and just eat that idea and be like, actually, guys, I'm not going to cast Dispel Magic because it would have undone the illusion and changed the entire session. And it's like, hey, I get it. No worries. But then if I'm playing in a system that I'm less familiar with, then it's a little different. I'm going to kind of be a little bit more selfish and be like, all right, I'm picking the easiest things. The first time I play any new system, whether it's something like really crunchy like Pathfinder or even something way more easy like Definitely Wizards or like I played one where it was a werewolf bake sale with even footing games. Yeah.
I love that.
Those ones are like, if the system's that simple and stuff like that, then I can really just let loose and have fun with it. And I start thinking about like voices that I can do because I love to do voices both as a DM and as a player. And it all comes back to making people laugh. If I'm going to play like a New Jersey, like a North Jersey from like Bayonne or something like that, woman named Veronica, who's a werewolf who hates the PTA leader or something like that. And I'm going to do like the very stereotypical, like, oh my God, that is insane. I cannot believe she said that to you. And like, if I'm going to do that voice for the entire session, I think it depends on who the DM is, what the system is and stuff like that. But if I can, yes, I love to do that. I also will balance that with like things that I like to do, which is me intentionally kind of being like, this is a new DM. I don't need to optimize my character to make this like insane, like, look at how much movement I have or how high my AC is. And I'm not doing that. Unless you're also a new player. If you have a new DM, I think that it's a little selfish to be like, I'm going to make my AC 32 because then I'll never get hit. It's like, guys, this person is just learning how to run the game. Cut him some slack. It's hard when the players have like imbalances like that, like when their armor classes vary so widely, just because like, at least for me, I try and rationalize it with like, how smart is this villain? Like, is this bad guy continually going to try and hit this person and never hit them? Like, at what point are they going to be like, this guy sucks, I'm going to go hit the warlock? Or like, do I have to start designing encounters all based around that, where it's like, now there's a lot more saving throw stuff because, hey, your AC can be 1,000,000. When I have you do a saving throw, that don't matter.
Yeah.
And it also, I think a lot of the time, in my experience, it depends on how long the campaign is, because that determines how many encounters there are. You know, the example of like, every once in a while, I'll throw an encounter out there that exploits the weaknesses of the characters. But because it's a long campaign and I don't do it that often, it doesn't really feel like a dick move to do that.
Right.
Whereas if it were like a one shot and I was like, ha ha, the one combat, I'm going to use all your weaknesses. Like, what a jerk move. Don't do that.
Yeah.
In a long campaign, I am going to have some combats where it's like, hey, guy who worships the lightning god, these guys are immune.
Yeah.
What's up? But that's because it's one combat in a slew of 1,000 combats. So it is okay to kind of do that every once in a while. So that's how I've done it. Cause they came into the campaign late. They were like a late addition. So they were already level 10 when he came in. He made a multi-class fighter wizard, but specifically picked fighter first, because this gets into the weeds a little bit when it comes to 5e mechanics. But like, when you pick fighter first, you get proficiency in all armor and all weapons. Then everything else is wizard. So that means that this wizard can wear heavy plate mail. So now I have a wizard with a shield, is a war wizard, which means that when they concentrate on spells, their AC goes up by 2. With the shield spell, has the potential of hitting literally a 30 AC, which is like, I've been able to hit it once or twice, but it was because they were versing like legendary monsters that have like a plus 14. So it's like insane. But every once in a while, I've also had monsters be like, I can't hit this guy, and just grapple them because their strength score sucks. So I'll just grapple them and then have the monster be like, bye, and just leave. And now your friends are alone and they don't have you as this incredible wizard tank. So it's just like, trying to think of interesting scenarios and stuff. And that table is also like very experienced players. So it's the table that I feel the most comfortable really going for it. This is the table where I would counter spell a healing spell or something like that. Or I would use power word kill or like those really crazy ones. Like, this is the table where I don't feel bad doing those things because I have to try and kill their characters just for it to be competitive.
Yeah.
Because they're all such good players and they're at level 12 now. And so it's incredible what they're capable of. I have so much fun with it. I like the challenge a lot. And I say that also as like a player. It's why I like picking spells that aren't often picked, or like intentionally not picking spells that are often picked. No one's asking me to do that. I'm choosing to not pick counterspell, even though it's a great spell.
We've mentioned a few times the idea of power gaming or min-maxing. What's your thought on that? I know there's a lot of contention around that issue.
I'm all for it. It just depends on the composition of the table. If the entire table are power gamers, heck yeah. If no one at the table is power gamers, beautiful. If you have half the table power gamers, other half not power gamers, that is, I think, the only time that you're going to run into issues. Any other way, I think I'm fine with it. if everybody's really, really good at coming up with these min-max incredible combinations of things and having their character do a plus whatever to this, by all means. Because as a DM, all I have to do is just change things on the back end. Monsters are a little bit stronger. The DCs are a little bit higher. I can still figure out ways to balance it. It's not a problem. It's only when there's a serious imbalance between players, I find. That's kind of where I stand on that. As long as everybody agrees to go hard, then let it rip. Otherwise, I'll straight up tell players like, hey, this isn't the game. This isn't the game where we're doing that. Take it easy.
Yeah. It sounds like one of the ways that you challenge yourself as a player is by not building that kind of min-max build. You're talking about a wizard with good strength.
Yeah, I think I've been playing the game for so long and I don't get to be a player often and stuff like that. So of course there's like so many builds that I know in my head are like so optimal and are just going to be so good at what they're supposed to be good at. And I'll save them for a one shot or something like that. But when it comes to any opportunity to play a character for more than one session, I want to get into the story of it. I want to get into the role play of it and stuff like that. And of course, if you're talking D&D 5th edition, the mechanics are an important part of the game. It's why you're choosing that system over other systems. And so I want to explore the mechanics and use them as a prism to like bounce the story off of. So then it comes down to not choosing the spells that make the most sense, like damage wise or something like that, but picking the spells that make the most sense for this character. Why would this character learn Fireball? You're an archaeologist at a dig site. You don't want to damage things. There's no reason to pick Fireball. Maximilian's Earth and Grasp makes a ton of sense. You're moving things around. You're like moving the earth. Like that makes sense. I find it to be a little bit more interesting. But that's the interesting thing about Taylor and I relationship is that Taylor is the min-maxer, the power gamer who's trying to be like, well, if I do 2 levels of this and then 3 levels of this, and then if I pick up that feat, I'm unstoppable.
Yeah.
Why would your character do that, though? He's like, I don't know. I'll figure it out. That's what makes us an interesting duo. We do feel so differently about that because, like, he likes to, quote unquote, break the game. That's the term used often. Whereas I like to break the lore. So, like, if the lore says furbolgs are always gentle giants, I want to play a furbolg barbarian. What does that look like? Why is it different? That's where I love to come in and be like, okay, apparently dwarves are always like X. I'm going to play the one that's like Y and figure out why it's like that, why there is a difference there. I love doing stuff like that.
Besides the gender question, which we've already talked about with Drow, is there anything else that you're kind of going against? Like in your example of the furbolg?
When it comes to Jessica, I think like easy one is just the fact that she is physical, like she is strong and like can fist fight somebody. Whereas a wizard normally the trope is like a wizard being like, oh no, like not being able to do anything. And I think that's really fun and interesting to have a wizard who isn't barbarian strong, but like comparatively to a commoner is incredibly strong and like dexterous and stuff like that, and having a focus on physical stats as opposed to putting everything else in like wisdom or constitution, which because constitution mechanically would make a ton of sense. You have concentration checks, your health makes a huge difference to put points in there. But what if I didn't put points in there and I put points in strength instead? Yeah, I think the gender thing was a big thing. Having this archaeology background and stuff like that. Those are the main things, I suppose, that makes Jessica kind of go against the grain. It's one of my favorite things to do, especially as a DM. Our players right now are in the Shadowfell. And if you just go on like any search engine and type in Shadowfell D&D, every picture is like shades of gray, desolate wasteland. It looks like the Badlands, but everything is dark and gray and dreary. And I was just like, what if though there's a whole Western town in there where everybody has snakes for some reason. There's a saloon, a chapel. There's like, it's like an old Western in the middle of the Shadowfell. And everyone there is like so polite and nice, because how eerie would that be if you're like desolate hellscape? And then you come to this town where everyone's like, well, howdy, how you doing? Welcome to Serpico. The pastor just is leaving the church right now. Like, I remember my players being like, something's afoot. Everyone is too nice. We're in the Shadowfell. And I love playing on stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a fun pastime of mine.
The comedy potential is great. You've got to make a Snakes on a Plane reference at some point, right?
I think somebody did at some point. There was some kind of, there's too many snakes.
Yeah. You mentioned before that you're in a 4-year campaign. Personally, for me, it's like a longer campaign gives you more opportunities to explore and build on the character. Is that part of the draw for you? Do you like longer campaigns?
What an interesting question. Yeah, I think when I started it, it was really just like, I have this idea for a campaign, and I know that it's not often you get to, as a player, and this was even coming from a place of not having a ton of experience. I knew how rare it was to have a game where you took a character from level 1 to level 20. That's rare to do, just in general. Let's do it. And so it started as just a challenge and like a proposition, a like holy grail kind of moment, this Mount Everest of DMing. And then freaking thank gosh for finding a group that has the consistency, the scheduling, and all of the beautiful things that not everyone gets to experience to be able to play this game for as long as we've been playing it. It was the first campaign that I ever wrote, which is why it has Forgotten Realms as like the base point. But then I just changed all the stupid stuff that I was like, hey, you're going to meet an orc who like is a baker at the city and they're awesome, and just deal with that. Okay. Like there's none of this, like, I don't know, wood elves and high elves hate each other. Get the heck out of here. That's silly. Yeah, exploring the characters has been so fascinating over this many years, and having all of the NPCs really matter. I've almost cried at different sessions as I'm describing both intense dramatic scenes, but also like really beautiful touching moments. Like one of our characters married an NPC. My friend's character was like, we could die any day now. Let's get married. And was like talking to the NPC and stuff. And then like privately sent me like, this is what their walking down the aisle song would be. So I like downloaded it into Roll20 and played it while I was describing it. And I found myself choking up. I was like, this is beautiful and meaningful. And it wouldn't be like that if we didn't know these characters so intimately. So for those reasons, I love long campaigns. However, I also have ADHD and I like to explore a ton of stories, and staying put for too long is difficult, which is why as a brand or whatever, Taylor and I have agreed that when it comes to our actual plays, we do not plan on doing a year long. That's just not what we're interested in. We want to tell shorter stories. Maybe in the future we'll like open it up. Who knows? But like right now, the longest we're planning on is like 8 or 10 episodes, and then shorter ones even also, because I want to explore so many different stories and stuff like this. And luckily that 4-year long campaign in Faerun, because I'm changing so much of the lore, I am able to explore a lot of interesting different things all in that setting, but also my players are up for it, which helps a lot too. And they're good at feedback, which has been really nice. What works, what doesn't work, what do you guys want to do? That's always been really, really helpful. And using that home game as the litmus test for a lot of things that I'll explore in future things. I have an idea of a Western game, but I've never done Western as like a vibe or a genre or whatever. This was my way of testing it out, was just being like, can you have a town where it's just one road, a chapel, a general store, a saloon, and the sheriff's office? Like, is that it? And it was like, kind of. I kind of can.
Yeah.
I love it.
What does Jessica look like?
Ooh, incredible. Jessica, in some regards, is your typical drow. Has that sort of like slate gray skin color, paper white hair. And I always, as somebody who's done drag and stuff like that, but doesn't have the money to buy like wigs like Trixie Mattel or some shit like that. All of the wigs that I own and stuff, you can't like put them up. You put the lace front in the front and you put it on, and then it's just long. But I've always had a fascination with messy buns. Mm-hmm. It's like such a specific feminine hairstyle that I'm such a big fan of for some reason. So that's a big part of it, especially the idea of her being studied, an archaeologist. She needs to have her hair up for millions of reasons. And then doing that really like stereotypical, like almost librarian thing of having like a pencil in it, or like a quill, I guess, in this case. I love that. So that's a big part of it. Messy bun pencil.
There's like the trope of the woman being like, oh, I have to get to work now. Hair has to go up.
Yeah. There's something about that I like. And then physique kind of has like a athlete's body in many respects. I can't remember if I had her with red eyes or yellow eyes. I think it was red. But red in the sense of like the same way that people have hazel eyes or blue eyes or something, like just the iris would be red as opposed to like the way sometimes a tiefling will have like all red. And then, yeah, just kind of because you're a wizard and you're not wearing armor or anything like that, kind of going in the direction of dressing almost like a monk in D&D senses specifically. So like a martial artist, like just having like a tank top, like very much like, again, Jurassic Park comes to mind. I want to dress up like, oh no, what is her name? The actress who plays the blonde botanist.
Laura Dern?
Yes. I want to dress like Laura Dern. I want to have a tank top on, maybe a button-down shirt that's kind of tied around the waist, high khaki shorts with like the socks and like boots.
Yeah.
Brilliant. That's what I'm looking for.
What is her name in the movie? It's like Ellie Sattler?
Yes, Dr. Sattler.
Dr. Sattler?
Yes. Absolutely. I was her for Halloween, actually.
I did hers for Halloween one year, too.
Oh, incredible.
Yeah, my husband dressed as Dr. Grant, and we dressed up. We had a 1-year-old baby, and we dressed her up as a dinosaur.
Amazing. I love that.
It was great. Yeah. Has she made any modifications besides dress to her body in order to more embody those feminine features?
Yes, she has. However, the specifics of how that would have worked in the sort of weird time period that these fantasy games are kind of set in, I don't even know if we discussed it between myself and the DM. I don't think it really ever was like is there like a surgeon who did things? Is it purely magic? It's easy sometimes to fall back on, and it depends on the scenario. Magic exists.
Yeah.
I don't know, got a spell cast and now they look more outwardly the way that they feel on the inside or whatever it may be. But yes, there was definitely some changes made that would better reflect how Jessica wants to present.
You talked about voice acting and liking doing voices. I've had a few trans guests on the show who have talked about the difficulty in altering their voice to match their gender identity. Do you imagine that being a part of her character, or that just being a way you embody her voice differently?
Yeah, I would have spent more time experimenting and, like, for lack of a better term, like practicing with this particular character. Like, as you can imagine, as a DM, I'm playing femme presenting or female characters all the time. Like, they just come up naturally. And sometimes it's like there are certain accents that I can do. Like, if I do a New York kind of Brooklyn accent or like a Southern Belle kind of character, it's easier for me to sound a bit more feminine because it's exaggerated. It's kind of like this hyperbole of being like, oh my God, sweetheart. Like, it's easier for me to hit it. Whereas if I'm just trying to make my normal speaking voice more feminine, it's something that I've probably practiced by myself 1,000 times for the sake of DMing and like voices and stuff. But I don't know if it comes down to like a thing of making so sure that it is not the butt of a joke. So I think when it came to Jessica and a more feminine intonation on the voice or like a higher octave or whatever it may have been, realistically, it probably would have been something that I found. I would have practiced and I would have had some feedback and stuff like that, because it's also something that I have to, and this is, I'm putting this on myself a little bit. I like it to be something that I can maintain. Right? Like, it's easy for me to do an Irish accent for a sentence. I can't do it for a whole conversation. I'm just not good at it. And it's the same with like voices when it comes to octaves and stuff like that, like what I can maintain and do in a way that also makes me feel comfortable so that I can explore and role play and stuff like that. It would be an interesting journey to figure out. It's definitely something that was on my mind, though, is like, what am I going to do for this voice? What do I feel comfortable with? Just from how the voice sounds, not even including any kind of regional dialects or accents or anything like that. Because I wasn't sure if I was going to do her like British posh, because I also, like I said, love playing against type. There's a stereotype. If you have that Southern drawl, that you're not intelligent. That's like a silly stereotype. I want to play against that. What if she does have a very strong Southern drawl, but is highly intelligent or has a Brooklyn accent? It's like, oh my God. I think that's really funny, but it's definitely something that was on my mind, was how she would sound. Because I'm like that with every character. And sometimes it's deep like this. And sometimes it's literally like, huh, that would be funny.
Yeah. I'm really bad at accents. I can do bro and valley girl because I grew up in LA, so it's very easy for me to just slip into that.
Yeah.
But anything else, I mean, I just go like high voice, low voice, quick voice, slow voice.
Absolutely.
Sounds like a Dr. Seuss book.
It does.
Jessica, what are you proudest of in your life?
Well, what an interesting question. I would say, what am I most proud of? Goodness. I would say, I think I am most proud of recognizing when things need to change and also then taking the action to change those things. Y'all ever heard that serenity prayer? Certain religious folks talk about it all the time. Something along the lines of, give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I like to think that I sort of embody the practice of that, taking that little that phrase and putting it into practice. I think I'm mighty proud of being able to do just that.
Thank you so much, Justin, for coming on the podcast and for sharing Jessica with me and my listeners.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It has been a blast.
What would you like to share with my listeners?
Yeah, just stay tuned for all the different things that we have coming out. I have so many interesting ideas for different settings and stuff like that. We have Mythos University, where it's ancient Greek mythology, but you're at a typical American university. So what does that look like when you're the son of Hermes and you're captain of the track team or whatever? And then I have ideas for the future that I'm just so excited to continue to explore these different setting ideas, and I'll try other systems. I'm open.
One of the things that any creator wants to know is what people think of their work. For podcasters, it can be especially difficult to get feedback. Did you know that you can now leave comments on individual episodes on Spotify? If you're listening there, I encourage you to leave a comment and let me know what you think about an episode. You may have also noticed a link in my show notes that says, send us a text message. If you have a question you'd like me to answer on a future episode, or just want to leave a comment, send me a message. I started a newsletter. If you'd like to get a behind-the-scenes peek at the podcast, follow my other projects like my current all-woman actual play, and be notified when a new episode drops, you can find the sign-up form in the show notes or on my website. Please share the podcast with a friend. Word of mouth is the best way to find new listeners. Your recommendations help me immensely. Thank you to all my listeners spreading the word. I'm so grateful. You can find me on TikTok at StarMamaC or on Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram, and Facebook as Characters Without Stories. You can also listen on YouTube at Characters Without Stories or follow the link in the description. I'm currently accepting submissions, particularly for non-D&D characters and for creators from marginalized communities. So if you'd like to share your character, you can go to the submission form at characterswithoutstories.com. Click Submit in the navigation. Thanks for listening, and may all your characters find their stories.